Alrighty, folks, welcome on to the launch episode of the Bop and Two Beat podcast. Now, I know for some people that's a strange name, but it's all about the things that we fill our lives with, the things that we are passionate about. And I wanted to create a podcast that give people the platform to talk about their obsessions, their hobbies, their hopes, their dreams, all sorts of stuff. And it all stems from probably one of my most memorable things at school, which was whenever we were able to get out, we went to a wee bakery at the top of the lane. It was called the Bop Shop. And in there, we were introduced to something called the Bop and TV, which was a Belfast bop that was lard with butter, and then they threw two sausage rolls in it. And I thought that was a great title for a podcast in terms of talking about the things that we fill our lives with, that what we stuff our life full with. And we're going to have lots of people on from lots of different backgrounds. You may know that I've done podcasts before on cultural stuff, on community-based things, and even from a justice point of view as well. But this is just going to be about people, their obsessions, and how they fill their lives with those things. So come along and join us for the ride and find out what people are filling their lives with. Alrighty, folks, so you're here with us on the very first episode of the Bop and Two Beat podcast, which, as you'll know, is about the good stuff that we fill our lives with, but also talking about the things that people can either become obsessed with or the things that they just dedicate their lives to. And I'm joined here, quite privileged to be joined by Jackie Redpath on this very first episode. Jackie, absolutely delighted to have you with us, man. How you doing?
I'm good, and it's a privilege. I hadn't realised this was your first episode, so
there you go.
I feel very, very privileged and just a wee bit nervous because if it doesn't all work out, I'll be to blame probably.
I think you'll be all right, so I think we'll be dead on. Jackie, I know that you're well known around obviously the Shankill area and stuff, but maybe this is going to a wider audience. Maybe it'd be useful for people to get a wee bit of an introduction to who you are. Maybe not about what you do, but just who you are, and then we'll delve into some of the things that you've filled your life with in a wee minute or two.
Yeah, well, my name's Jackie Redpath, as you've said, as I'm introduced, and I work now as chief executive of the Greater Shankill Partnership in Belfast. And it's in a neighbourhood of Belfast which saw a lot of the troubles, a lot of the violence that happened during the troubles. But it's also a part of Belfast, like many former industrial cities, that suffers from very severe deprivation on quite a number of fronts. And my job of work in the Shankill Partnership is that we are a community-based, community-led regeneration agency seeking to right the wrongs of the past in terms of the levels of deprivation that exist here and to chart a way forward strategically as well as doing stuff on the ground every day, but also strategically for this community so that it has, a good and productive future. So I've been working at that sort of stuff all my working life, and that's been a long time.
Right, okay. Well, let's talk a wee bit about that, though. So you're saying that it's been a long time. So what has motivated you to kind of fill whatever amount of time it is that you've been doing this here in terms of dedicating your life to community development in the Shankill area?
I'm doing a quick calculation, and it's actually 52 years I've been working at this. So, yeah, and I've never thought of it really like that before. Because in many ways, it seems like yesterday, although I think the older you get, the faster time seems to go because it's more limited. But even looking back, like I do look back sometimes. I'm a terrain, so I'm very sort of earthy, and rooted. And I would think back, somebody talked about something that happened 30 years ago, and then I'd go back 30 years before that and think of what I was doing, so it has been a long time. And, my commitment to it is just because it's where I'm from. I'm part of this community. It's what I was born into. It's what made me what I am, for better or for worse. And it's where I belong. And some people look and say, that's an amazing commitment. And I don't see it like that. It might have been braver. There's a way in which I could see the length of time that I've been committed to this as doing something very safe.
Right.
Now, that mightn't seem to people on the outside, somewhere like the Shankill that's had a lot of violence and a lot of deprivation and difficulties, as being a particularly safe place. But when you live here, it is a safe place. Yeah. And, you know, the safety of what you know would maybe have been a factor of me and stepping out. It might have taken a lot more bravery to have stepped out somewhere else. But this is what I know. And I don't really know why. It's what I'm committed to. It's what I believe in. I do think if you want to see a difference happening, and that does drive me, that you need to be in for a long haul. You know, you can't just leapfrog from one thing to another, for me anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that's been an important thing, to see that longevity and commitment to something where you can actually see the difference of what's happening.
Sure. Is there anything that you can think of when you look back that was like a motivating incident or something that took place that made you go, I'm getting involved in something, I'm going to get involved in doing something that's for the betterment of my community? What was that?
It was anger, really. You know, I mean, well, first of all, I don't know how much it resonates outside Northern Ireland, but, you know, I had a very religious upbringing that was like an evangelical, Protestant evangelical upbringing, where, you know, you were saturated in you know, the notion of converting other people, you know. And I sort of stopped that, you know. I was very serious about it when I was growing up, because it was, I would say I was indoctrinated about it, but I was very serious about it, but I sort of moved away from it in my late teens. And what was happening around me at the time, you couldn't avoid, because the troubles had broken out here, and you know, the Shankill Road in Belfast, you know, was very much at the heart and centre of what was going on. And that was day and daily, you know, levels of violence. But then, as well as that, you had a massive process of redevelopment going on. You know, the Shankill community, like many inner city communities throughout the British Isles, was you know, made up of slums. You know, slum housing that were over well over 100 years old. So they were knocking all those down, and it was a very inhumane process that was going on. It was destroying a community. It was hollowing out a community. And on top of that, you then had Belfast's industrial base disintegrating. You know, the heavy industries, like happened in many industrial British cities and elsewhere. You know, the shipbuilding going to the wall, engineering going to the wall, and what we were famous for here, the linen mills. You know, in the Shankill, within 1 square mile of the Shankill, there were 18 linen mills. Irish linen was born here, worldwide, born here. And that's where people found their work, in the linen mills, the shipyard, and engineering. And all of those were going at the same time. So you had what we call, like in this community, a perfect storm that hit us, of industrial collapse and the jobs going with it, of massive redevelopment. So you were losing your job, you were losing your house, the bulldozer at the end of the street, and it was mad violence going on at the same time. You know, work that out.
Yeah. No, it's that kind of a flux for everybody.
You couldn't avoid it. That's what you were living in, and you had to do something. And you had directions you could go in.
Right.
You know, I was brought up in a very religious direction. At this point where all this broke, I had sort of moved away from that. Which was a process, but I'd moved away from it. But I still had a commitment to people that I'd learned from that. You know, I did take some good stuff out of it. You also had a choice. There was paramilitaries forming, you know, and it was a big attraction for young people, you know, because you're going to belong to something. There's a lot of excitement. You hadn't seen that this damn thing was going to last for 25, 30 years, and the mayhem that was going to be created. But there was daily riots. There was, you know, it was just crazy. And that was a route. There was then the social issues that were absolutely in your face. And I've always said at that period there was two troubles going on. There was the violent ones, and then there was the redevelopment.
Yeah.
And I would have argued actually that the redevelopment had a bigger impact on people's lives, individually on people's lives, than the troubles.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that in a wee minute in terms of, but you mentioned there's something about that anger was a motivation for you.
Yeah.
So talk to me a bit about what that was like. How did that manifest itself? And well, I know you've talked a wee bit about the idea that the perfect storm was there was all of these other things. But for you personally, that obviously germinated in a particular way for you that then led you to get involved in terms of your community. And talk to us a wee bit about what that anger was and how you then
Well,
started to try and deal with it.
it wasn't a personal thing of what was being done to me, but my house was
Yeah.
being knocked down, but so was everybody else's, so it wasn't about me. But it was, I think, to do with the redevelopment, that what they were destroying in this community, it wasn't just the bricks and mortar of what they were destroying, they were taking apart the way a community worked, which was it was an extended family thing where you were born, and in many industrial cities throughout the UK, it was the same, where when you were brought up, you were likely to get married, more likely to stay married as well,
Yeah.
probably. You moved across the street from your mum and dad, your mother and father lived across the street, and your granny was up around the corner, and you had aunts and uncles all within 3 or 4 streets. And that whole extended family structure, which then extended into like a neighbourhood structure of those particular sets of streets. In the Shankill, you had a part called the Hammer, another part called the Nick, another part called Brown Square. All communities within a community.
Sure.
And then you were part of a bigger thing called the Shankill, and give you a sense of identity. And the big thing, give you a sense of belonging. What was being taken away was that whole, the houses were going, but they needed to. There were slums.
Yeah.
It was the flats that were putting back with the problem, and the sort of plans that were being done. But as well as that, they took apart that family structure, extended family structure, and old people were put in one part of the community, and 4 people with big families in another, 4-bedroom houses, and single people were shifted to another part, and they broke it up. Plus, they bulldozed at a rate. I mean, the Shankill, this community's population went from 76,000 people in the 1960s down to 23,000 in the 1980s. I mean, it was a dramatic fall. No community can sustain that. So I was angry. I was angry at what was happening here, at the damage it was doing to people. I can't believe, looking back, that combination of that redevelopment, I'm talking about the troubles, the loss of all the jobs, the collapse of the industrial base. I don't know how we got through it. Many people didn't. And I got angry about the injustice of what was being done to this community by government, by the planners, and by all those in authority, really. And I got angry about that and wanted to do something about it.
There was almost a sense that it was deliberate, wasn't it? Some of the planning and the things that were put in place, it was done deliberately to have an impact on the community, wasn't it?
Oh, there's no doubt that, I mean, there was reasons for it, and it was to do with planning reasons, really, because of the collapse of the old industries, which the unionist government saw coming here from the 1950s on, they decided to attract inward investment, multinationals, from the United States and other places. And they needed greenfield sites, so they developed new towns at Craigavon and Antrim as a growth town, and outside Belfast, 30 miles outside Belfast. And then they had to connect those up to the docks, so they built these big motorways and just went right through communities in Belfast to bulldoze them, to make way for this sort of thing. It was a flawed and wrong approach to the whole thing, and it so damaged people's lives. I mean, then mental health and all wasn't something you talked about. You just thought people were a bit odd, or whatever phrase you used, or their nerves were bad.
Their nerves were bad, that's it.
Bad nerves.
That's it. Come back for
somebody had a mental breakdown with bad nerves.
That's it. Because even they had that one, even after like the First and Second World Wars, they talk about shell shock rather than PTSD and stuff. You don't know really
never recognised
exactly.
it.
And I suppose we'll probably talk about this a wee bit later on, about the idea of the trauma that the Shankill has experienced as a result of that there, and how that's manifested itself. But so what made you go down the particular lane? Because you said you could have went down a couple of ways. There was a paramilitary option, there was this community development option.
There's a religious option, and I suppose I suppose one of the things that saved me from joining paramilitary at the time was the religion stuff, because at that point, I would have been fodder for it, 16, 17, 18. I was still into the religious stuff. I was very ardent, like I was extreme about it, and in a sense I've always been extreme about whatever I've been doing, that carried over,
You're all in.
Whatever I was going to do, it was going to be 120%, which has got strengths and weaknesses to it, And that probably stopped me from joining a paramilitary religious stuff. And then when I saw the other stuff happening, it was a process, because the religion, it was because of the process I went through in leaving the church that I was brought up in, which was, on the Shankill here, where, they were driving in at night, and, they used to have gospel meetings on a Sunday night at 7 o'clock, which was there to convert people, it's why you were there. And they moved them to 4 PM so as they could get out with their cars before the riots started.
Right,
The riots
okay.
were like every night. And I thought, this isn't right. And I remember asking for the loan of the church hall, because all the young people, now it would be called peer youth work.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know what it was then, but we were out. We were out to talk to them about God and bring them into the church hall. But they'd built a new one and they wouldn't give us it. Said people might put cigarettes out.
Right. Okay.
So we got a wee community house and opened it up. As called the Way, and it was like a religious thing, but it eventually became known as the Jesus Liberation Front.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
The JLF.
The JLF, yeah. It was like a counter. And it became for me a counter to, in the riots, we were walking into the middle of them with Jesus stickers over
Right,
from
okay.
America and saying to people, real peace is Jesus,
Right.
and all that sort of stuff.
It's a wee bit of a connection to that, because there was a group in England, though, that they were called the Jesus Army at one point, though, as well. I remember that there, and they used to do that kind of thing. They arrived in towns on buses and things.
It was
like
a
that,
big
yeah.
thing like that. It arose in America actually in the early 70s as the Jesus people.
Yes,
It was
that's
like
right,
a hippie
yeah.
thing that became a thing. I fancied myself as a bit of a hippie at the time, and we became a Jesus. And then a guy called Arthur Blessed arrived. He pulled a cross behind him on a wheel,
Right.
and he still walks about with it. Actually, he was over in the Shankill recently, apparently with Jack McKee. But
Right.
yeah, so I got involved in that, but I realised the church wasn't doing it, was retreating from it,
Okay.
closing its doors. And I started reading about stuff in South America, like which was about liberation theology, and I was still in the God thing, but gradually I realised that this house that we had, that all the kids were coming in that were banned from youth clubs and all sort of, and they're rat and they were running into the house and all. Some of them got converted, and I started seeing them separating themselves off, and I gradually left any belief in that sort of thing and switched really to this business of dealing with what was in front of you, which was this redevelopment stuff and a community that needed defended.
Okay.
They were going to wipe it out.
Uh-huh. And where did that show? You make the change from you're involved in this church-based stuff. You make a change to do some work that's outside of that. Where did that start? So what was it with an organisation, or was there? Did you set up something on your own, or whatever? How did that actually pan out?
I kept applying for jobs and couldn't get them. I was one of the few people managed to go to university from the Shankill, and I tried to do a social work degree, and I don't know what I said at the interview, but they didn't think it was fit to be a social worker, so I never got that. Didn't get that one. And then I applied for a job on a youth club in the Shankill in the YMCA. It was on the Shankill at the time. Whatever I said at that interview, they think it was a bit too radical,
Right, okay.
They didn't give me that job. And there was this thing set up, the Shankill Community Council, which still exists, and I got the first employee there.
Oh, right, okay.
And and that was like a community development job in the 1970s. But again, whatever was going to be happening about projects and this and that and the other, what was at your front door were these bulldozers, and you need to do something about it. And as a result of that, we set up the Save the Shankill campaign, which, probably one of the things I'd be proudest of being involved in, because I actually it actually stopped this community being wiped out of existence,
Yeah, so talk to us about where did the influence from that come from? Obviously, with you mentioned a bit about, even sort of the liberation theology stuff. You read about stuff elsewhere. Were there any other things that you were either reading or people that you were encountering with that kind of influenced you to, that helped shape some of your ideas and some of the things that you were thinking about doing?
Yeah, well, there was people locally that did it. There were people here. There was people from outside the Shankill that worked here. There's a guy called Ron Weiner that wrote a book called The Rape and Plunder of the Shankill, and Ron was from an academic background, but he became a community activist as well as an academic. And it was great because he could write, and there wasn't many of us about that could write very well, And he actually does a seminal book that documents what happens in a community, wherever you are in our city, when they come to redevelop it. And Ron put a lot of theory behind what we were doing. And then there were other people about here. There was some clergymen that were involved that had been quite radical. They would have belonged to that that liberation theology type approach in South America.
Right.
Believe it or not, there were Church of Ireland,
Right.
Anglican clergy on the Shankill, guy called the Reverend Brian Smeaton, who was as crazy as whatever. But, you found yourself in a setting where there was other people wanting to do stuff about this, and you were able to it was possible to pull people together, not only at community level and from churches but you had local shopkeepers that where shops were going to be knocked down, that were getting angry and animated, and you had the paramilitaries in their early days. And I mean, I would have been talking to them about, listen, there's a different, you've got a war here that you're fighting about the IRA, but there's another war. This community's going from under your feet. While you're doing that, you need to address this as well. And that eventually they were made illegal, most of them, but then, they joined this campaign. And another big thing just after I started work was a strike that happened here in 1974 called the Ulster Workers' Council strike. And in a way, it was the last hooray, in the best sense of that word, of the power of a community to do something, because there was still an industrial base there. And basically these workers, in protest against political arrangements at the time, were able to close the place down. Total close the place down. And when I saw that happening, I thought, community workers, we're not going to shift this problem against the power of the government and the planners. We need other assistance. And, the Ulster Workers' Council brought together a coalition of people. And I remember after their strike going to them and saying, we need you, and one of their key people became chair of the Save the Shankill campaign. And so we had an amalgam of groups across the community that were determined to stop the worst of redevelopment and get it turned around into better development, stop the flats being built, get houses built on the street level, stop the motorway going through, which wasn't, well, for parts of the Shankill there was to be three.
Yeah, because that's what they were talking about. They were talking about putting this three-lane
thing, and the Shankill Road was to become a
route through.
A route in, and the Crumlin Road and the Falls Road. And also to stop the shops being knocked down. And remember, as all our first public protest, we all marched down the Shankill, and at the bottom of the Shankill Road up on the corner of Townsend Street, no demolition beyond this point. And we were able to enforce that.
Right, okay.
There was no bulldozers coming on anymore. So we stopped anything happening until they were willing to negotiate with us. And when they became willing to negotiate, we drew alternative plans to them.
Okay.
So I remember a night, we were in Agnes Street, right opposite this building.
Right,
in
okay.
Agnes Street on a Sunday night, where we met the planners in a wee house, and they came in on a Sunday night. They were that desperate because we'd stopped anything moving. And they came in and looked at the wall, and we had their plans up on the wall, and below their plans we had our plans for the same
thing,
patch, only without the flats and all. And we had technical assistance to do it from Queen's University at the time. The Department of Town and Country Planning, radical stuff, came out and helped us. They drew the plans. We told them what we wanted. And eventually that night, at first they refused to get into a discussion because they said they weren't going to criticise another planner's plans, as in the Queen's plans. But eventually they came talking, and, eventually what we wanted began to be implemented, and they stopped building the flats in the end. They had to take them down, the big Weetabix flats that were built. And we stopped the shops being knocked down up as far as they had got, which was almost the Agnes Street at that stage down below here. So so there's still Shankill shops, not what it used to be. There's not the population that there used to be. Is the community sustainable? Probably not. Is there more to be done? There's more to be done. But, what has happened now, in mid-Shankill and further up is much better than what was planned to happen and what happened in Lower Shankill.
No, we'll get that out a wee bit later on as well. So talk to me, try and give me a flavour of what a typical day back then for you would have been like. I'm sure it was packed to the gills with stuff.
Yeah, well, it was, and it was day and night, really. It did become your life, and, it's you know, that's a good thing in that it's something you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
The bad thing is it becomes your life, you know, and not much beyond it. But you were able to build in you know, a lot of connections and friendships and a bit of drinking and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, you know, it you up. But so you got into work. We had a wee shop that became this centre of this campaign, and the community council was falling down around us, but it seemed great at the time getting somewhere like that. And you got into work, and you had people coming in with living in awful conditions, you know, where half their street was knocked down, the rats were running everywhere, they couldn't get a house, they couldn't get anywhere. And they were, you know, so there was one-to-one stuff where people were looking help and assistance and push their case. And then there was all the campaigning and the organising around it. It was just a whole day like that, and it was people coming and going. It was a totally different sort of way of working. You couldn't do it now. You wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to do it now. You get targets and
Right, okay.
contracts. We didn't have contracts around.
What was it like trying to navigate that? Because if you're just, you know, you've kind of not wormed your way, but you've kind of made this part of your life, and you've got all of these issues, wide ranging issues, planning issues, construction issues, retail, business, development, all these kind of things. And people are coming to you with issues, and here, can you help us with this? What was it like trying to navigate your way through that, and then trying to find the right people to connect with and try and feel like you're actually making progress? And I suppose for the people who were coming to you to actually see that you were making progress.
Yeah. Well, I think there was some things about that. Well, the first thing is it was exciting, you know, and when you're younger, that's you know, you have loads of energy, and that excitement was something that was good. You know, you had a reason for getting up. You were motivated, and you had a reason. Also, we had quick wins,
Right.
and it's important in a campaign, whatever it is, to have some quick wins, because you can't sustain campaigns. Campaigns, by definition, have a life shelf.
Yeah.
Or shelf life.
Yeah. Either way, it works.
I don't know what came out there, but yeah. You can't maintain that, you know. So you have to have quick wins, and you have to be able to show gains. So some of those quick wins can be negative, like we stopped the bulldozers, pretty sharpish. You know, you won't be knocking any more down to talk to us, you know. And then we started getting houses built that people could see were on a street pattern, that were the sort of thing they understood and wanted to live in, and that brought all the community together, didn't separate elderly people off in one part and old people's homes, and, you know, big families somewhere else and all this. So people started to see that happening. But at the same time, because it was about community development, not just about the campaigns, I suppose I'd call that community action. But community development was about bringing people together and then working together on positive things to make things happen around the arts, around culture, around, you know, there was a lot of things came later as very important to us about education under achievement. But then the achievement was just getting to school without getting killed through the streets and the troubles and the rats and what was burning still from the night before and all. You know, you got to school, that was a big thing. You know, never mind what you were learning, or not learning. But so there was good dynamic in the community, and because you were under threat and felt you were under threat, what you had was community cohesion. And that was something we lost later, maybe. So that's a very important factor. You could not exaggerate the importance of having a sense of belonging. Whatever that sense of belonging.
It's almost like a basic human need. We're built to belong. You know, human beings are built to belong. And when you take that away from us, then inevitably problems and things come with it, because people start trying to fill the void with something else. You need to find connection in some shape or form, don't you?
You need to find that, and we are social beings, and that sense of belonging was where you lived, you know, then in terms of the Shankill, and then when somebody threatens it from the outside, whether it was the IRA then, or whether it was the planners or whatever it was, it strengthened your resolve and your sense of togetherness. there's an ill health in that as well.
Yeah.
You know, there's another side to that, which is you get closed off from anything from the outside.
Yeah.
Because you have such a strong sense of community, you repel everything coming from the outside. And we always need outside influences. You know, inside it becomes incestuous in the lesser sense of that term.
It's difficult to walk a balance with that, because you're caught in between the wanting to do stuff for this community, but it's like, oh, but we need to bond together. And because some of the stuff that the community was facing at the time was seen to be like that outside influence, it could almost be, let's put a shield up and let's keep it in.
And when you asked me, you know, I mean, there's a couple of things about that. You asked me about something that I would have been reading, or was there something I read? And it was much more recent than that. In recent times I read this, but it made sense of a lot back there that kept you going. And that there's this guy that I would read a lot of his stuff, Deepak Chopra. And he wrote a lovely wee book called The Way of the Wizard, which is this invention of Merlin talking to Arthur and instructing him in the way of the wizard.
All right, okay.
And there's this wee bit in it where he says to Arthur, the whole banquet is in the first mouthful. And in a way, like when you're starting out on your journey in work or life or whatever, you know, everything's new. Mm-hmm. It's always you're tasting the first mouthful, and everything, you know, it's like whatever you're going to get the rest of the time, it's all in that first mouthful.
That's good. I like that.
And that really gets you moving. The trick in life is to keep it fresh like that. It's always a first mouthful.
It's always like a first
stale, you know.
Yeah.
And that is the wee lesson, the depth of that lesson, you know, to keep things always new and fresh, you know. But in a way, reading that tells me why that was such an amazing time. It was great.
Alrighty, folks, that's the end of our very first episode here on the Bob and Toomey podcast. That was part one of our chat with Jackie Redpath, community activist on the Shankill Road. Make sure you join us next week for part two.